Hello, and welcome to another update. In this one, I'll be covering the latest developments throughout the front line, as well as the tactics and developments throughout the front line. So starting out in the direction of Robotyne, here fighting continues as the Ukrainian forces manage to advance a slight bit further here in the direction of Verbove to the east of Robotyne. So what we're seeing is that the Ukrainian forces are sending infantry groupings towards the trenches of the Russian army. If we take a look at the positions map, we can see that the trench map is located right here. So the fighting is mostly taking place here in the northwestern parts of these trenches manned by Russian soldiers across the anti-tank ditches and other fortifications against armored vehicles on the western side of these trenches. So what we're seeing is that generally across the front, not just in the Robotyne direction, the Ukrainian forces are heavily using infantry in comparison to armored vehicles across the whole front. So what we see is that, for example, here in this part of the front, the Ukrainian forces actually sent their armored vehicles close to the anti-tank ditches. Then they dismount the infantry, which after that proceed across the anti-tank ditch, move through the forest patches across, and then try to move their way all the way up to the trenches manned by Russian soldiers. So this is a lengthy process, and which is why we're seeing very slow developments here on this part of the front. Because the Russian forces have some fortifications in the area, they have heavy trenches here in this direction, manned by a lot of Russian soldiers. They recently received reinforcements from air assault divisions. So the Russian forces have a lot of soldiers who are prepared to fight against the Ukrainian forces, and the Ukrainian forces are not launching armored assaults. Instead, they are launching infantry-based assaults. So this is going to have limited success at a slower rate compared to armored assaults. The reason for this is because the Ukrainians have not found a way or time or place to properly pass through the Russian anti-tank ditches. So to everyone saying the Ukrainians would just ram through the dragon teeth or drive over the anti-tank ditches, well, this is clearly not the case, because we've yet to see a single Ukrainian armored vehicle across the anti-tank ditch, despite the Ukrainians breaking through the anti-tank ditches a very long time ago, about a month ago now. So the Ukrainians have had a month to pass over with armored vehicles, and so far have been unable to do so. And so far we're only seeing infantry-based assaults across the anti-tank ditches. And to support these claims I'm making about the Ukrainian strategy, in the latest past weeks, we've mostly seen videos and pictures of Russian forces attacking Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicles like the Bradley. We have not seen any tank footage at all. Every tank footage we've seen over the past few weeks have been older videos and pictures, not recent ones. All of the recent ones shows some Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, mortars, and so on that are transporting troops to the front, dismounting them by forest lines, and then the troops, infantry, pass through the forest lines, try to clear the mines, and advance through the anti-tank ditches to reach into Verbove and the surrounding trenches in the area. As an example, we see this picture here, which shows some artillery hitting some positions by forest patches, and we also see a vehicle in the background, one with smoke rising from it and another by the road. So we see that there is indeed some vehicles being used next to forest patches, but other than that we see no tanks, and we cannot see any infantry. This is most likely because they're taking cover in the forests, which also makes it more difficult for Russian drones to detect them, which is why it is the strategy that the Ukrainian forces are using. We then move on to the Remevsky Ledge area, where here fighting continues, and in the direction of Novomayorsk, we've yet again found some video and picture evidence of Ukrainian forces in Novomayorsk. We see them actually here right by the intersection of the roads to the north of the village, at the very outskirts of it. The Ukrainian forces managed to advance to this direction, and again we see some vehicles arriving here, and we see that there's actually an area here where the river doesn't completely cross over, because the river here is very shallow, so the Ukrainian forces actually don't need to cross the river, although there is a crossing which can be easily fortified. But considering the Ukrainian forces are here further south, that means that they've been able to break through, and as such the Ukrainian forces don't really need to cross a river. although they are crossing technically a river, they don't have to drive over the water, they're just passing through. And we see as such that the Ukrainian forces are now gathering troops here to the northern outskirts of the village. The video shows Ukrainian forces right by the road. I'm not going to show the video because there's infantry and there's artillery and thus demonetization. But from the video, we see that the Ukrainian forces have managed to enter the very northern outskirts of the village, after which they were hit by artillery. So there is ongoing fighting here by Novomayorsk. And this, in addition to the analysis I did yesterday, shows why Novomayorsk is a clear target for the Ukrainian forces in this part and section of the front line. We then move on to the Opytne area southwest of Avdiivka, where here I reported on yesterday that the Ukrainians managed to enter the outskirts of the village here to the northeastern outskirts of the village. So what we're seeing is that the Ukrainians are continuously assaulting the village here from the northeast. However, according to the latest report, the Russian forces managed to push them out of the outskirts of the village, regaining full control of it. And a video was recorded in northwestern parts of the village of Russian soldiers doing a report while doing a patrol in the village, trying to tell everyone that the Ukrainians were pushed out of the village. Although it was taking place in the northwestern outskirts, according to Syriac maps, this report is true, and therefore the Russian forces now have full control over the village again, after Ukrainian forces managed to advance multiple times over the past few days. So the Ukrainian forces here are trying to push the Russians across the river line, but the Russians are able to hold on to the flank. And I say flank because the majority of the Russian positions across the river line are by Vodiane rather than anywhere else. And as such, the eastern flank would be Opytne. If the Ukrainian forces manage to capture Opytne here to the east, they will be able to hit the Russian forces by the supply lines, maybe cross over and take control over some of these positions, as there's no real Russian positions in this whole area, which would mean that Vodiane would be isolated. So the Opytne area is an important flank for the Russian forces across the river line. We then move on to the direction of Klishchiivka, where here we see that there was another video reported from the direction of Klishchiivka, and in it we see that the Ukrainian forces had some positions in the center of the village, and fighting goes on in the direction of the northern outskirts, as Russians still have a foothold within the village, but other than that the Ukrainians have almost full control over it. And I get to reiterate my position, the Ukrainian forces are heavily using infantry fighting vehicles and infantry rather than armored assaults. And this was shown by the fact that across the whole front, we are mostly seeing infantry fighting vehicles and infantry in all of the videos and reports on the whole front over the past few weeks. Meanwhile, the reports of tanks have been significantly decreased. Of course, there's been not been zero, as we have seen, for example, the Challenger tank being destroyed, but mostly it has been significantly decreased in comparison to what we've been seeing prior to that. And in different news, there's been this talk about the Russian military expansion, them allegedly mobilizing another 420,000 troops. So what I can say about this is that the Western media is very late to report on this. I've been talking about this for a very long time, partially because of the Russian announcement in January 2023, where they announced that they would expand their military to 1.5 million troops. That would require an additional 500,000. These are all troops that are contract soldiers. This does not include conscripts. Therefore, they would need another 500,000 troops. So the Western media is saying now that the Russians would mobilize 400,000 troops sounds bogus, in the sense that the Russians have been recruiting since January, since the end of the partial mobilization, and they have reported that in 2023, so far, they have had an additional 270,000 troops in their ranks, based on a volunteer system where the Russian public joined the army on their own volition. So I did some quote-unquote research. This is not really considered research, but I asked around in my Telegram channel and other places to see, is this really a volunteer system, or are there people being conscripted and mobilized? In the end, it seems that it is volunteer basis, and due to financial incitement, as the wage and benefits of a Russian soldier is much above the average median wage in Russia, and therefore the ones, especially from poorer regions, are very interested in working as a soldier in the Russian army because there's a lot of financial benefits to it. Even if they fall in battle, they still have a lot of benefits for their families. So in any case, if they join the army, it's basically guaranteed financial success for their family, and therefore there's a lot of incitement to join if they are in any sort of financial struggle. This is also corroborated by the British Ministry of Defense that claimed that the Russian army would want to recruit some of these migrant workers coming from Central Asia to Russia, because typically these are people who want to make more money than what they can make in their own home countries. So if the soldier job is much better paying than the average median job in Russia, then these would be interested in gaining such a pay. So there were some reports by the British Ministry of Defense claiming that the Russians wanted to recruit these, and that would make sense if they are wanting some additional troops to their ranks. And according to the reports, it seems that these recruits get about 3 months of training before they are ready to be sent to the front, according to the Russian army. So essentially, there will be an additional 270,000 troops by the end of the year that are all fully trained according to their standards and ready to be sent to the front. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.